First came a defence deal with Vladimir Putin. Then Kim Jong Un sent troops to fight for Russia in its war against Ukraine. Tae Yong Ho, one of the highest-ranking North Korean officials to ever defect, has been watching developments closely and is a strong advocate for 2 North Korean prisoners of war held in Ukraine. Mr. Tae, why did Kim Jong Un sign a defence agreement with Vladimir Putin in June 2024?
First of all, Kim Jong Un wants to further develop its nuclear arsenal. So he made something like a 5-year plan of North Korea's defense development. But first he needs foreign currency to buy the spare parts and elements for these nuclear and missile components. And secondly, he needs advanced technologies. So he looked around where he could get any help, and his eyes at that time were on Russia. President Putin was in very difficult situation by letting Ukrainian forces occupy some part of Russian territory, which is called Kursk. So Putin approached to Kim Jong Un whether Kim Jong Un could help. So actually, the needs of Kim Jong Un and Putin, arrived at the same destination. So Kim Jong Un decided to send soldiers to Russia, and in return, he could get military aid and technologies, and also, secondly, he can get some hard currencies from Russia by sending the soldiers. And domestically, he has more ambiguous political propaganda that North Korea is a nuclear power. So as long as North Korea has nuclear weapons, North Korea's status has become to the level of strategic nations. That means Russia, China, America, or even France or Britain. But North Korea so far has not been in that level. But Kim Jong Un wants to show to the world that even North Korea was able to influence the outcome of Ukraine war. And now North Korean soldiers are actually at Russia and Ukraine war. And he is telling to North Korean people that because of these nuclear weapons, America cannot attack North Korea, so that he has more flexibility.
Why, though, did he keep it secret for so long that he sent soldiers to Russia?
At the first stage, he was not quite sure whether North Korean soldiers would be very active or would be very effective in that war, because North Korean soldiers have not, fought quite a long time. So when he first sent soldiers to Kursk area, in the first few weeks, there were huge casualties. North Korean soldiers were not trained to combat in the situation of full-scale drone wars. North Korean soldiers were not trained to make a sudden assault, and North Korean soldiers were not trained to fight against an enemy in cooperation with Russian army, with foreign forces. So in the first few months, in December and January, there were huge casualties, which Kim Jong Un did not expect. But later on, North Korean forces learned how to fight this drone war. North Korean forces learned how to cooperate with Russians. So from the period of January, March, and April, there was a clear success of North Korean forces. North Korean forces overwhelmed Ukrainian forces in Kursk, and they were at the stage of driving Ukrainian forces out of Russian territory, which Russians couldn't do it. So at that time, Kim Jong Un learned that it is the time for him to loudly broadcast the success of North Korean forces, the battle in Russian war. He wants to tell North Korean people and the world that how effective, how strong, how powerful North Korean forces in Ukraine war. So there was a kind of, a several evolvement of his final decision to open it.
What can you tell us about the type of soldiers that were deployed by North Korea to Russia? We understand that the two POWs came from the 92nd and the 94th Brigade. What type of soldiers are they?
Oh, they are special unit inside our North Korean force. Their unit is called Storm Brigade. Yes, so it's a special force, something like Americans, Delta Force or Navy SEAL. So they are very well specially trained. And Kim Jong Un wanted to see whether these special units were effectively fighting in the real war.
What implications do you think the deployment of North Korean troops to the war in Ukraine has for the security of the Korean peninsula and for the region?
First, North Korean forces now are learning the modern war. According to their report, in the battlefield, hundreds of drones attacked North Korean forces like a heavy rain in the sky. Yes, but after a few weeks, they learned how to fight these drones. They developed new tactics, while South Koreans are not. So I think in the long run, North Korean forces are experiencing conventional warfare, and they have nuclear weapons and the missiles, right? So in the long run, I think it could play a very kind of game change role in Korean Peninsula's security structure.
We understand that there were diaries found on some deceased North Korean soldiers that had diagrams of how to fight against drones, where one of the North Korean soldiers would become a target.
Yes, that is actually one of the character of North Korean forces. At the first few weeks, North Korean forces didn't know how to deal with the drones, so they dealt with the drones collectively. All the soldiers in the unit started to fire the drones, and it resulted in the total, disaster. So they later on learned that at least they sacrificed one of them. Let one run and the others hide. And when the drones follow these one soldiers, the others, could have time to hide themselves and started to return firing against the drones. So this is a kind of, North Koreans' way of tactics to deal with drones. Maybe the army officer would direct, or even before the start of the battle, they may decide who would be the number one target. If he is killed and stopped moving, then who would be the second and who would be the third? So there could be the numbering of soldiers who would be sacrificed for the outcome of the battle.
And do you have any sense of how they would determine which person would be sacrificed?
Usually in North Korean teams, they have layers of their classes inside the unit. For instance, if it is a company, then usually the leader of the company should remain as the last one, because he has to lead the battle. And after him, there should be a number two who would lead the battle and the unit. So usually number one and number two are exempt from number one sacrifice. But after that, there is a very clear the classes and layers. So maybe they will follow according to their own army class layers.
We know that there have been 2 North Korean soldiers captured by Ukraine. Why are there so few POWs when more than 10,000 North Korean soldiers were deployed?
According to North Korea's media, hundreds of North Korean soldiers committed suicide when they were surrounded by Ukraine forces and learned there were no way to exit. Usually they commit suicide, in units or collectives. So if North Korean soldiers do not commit suicide or blow themselves up and captured as prisoner of war, then it could be regarded as a kind of, the treason to the society and to the North Korean forces. According to North Korea's Soldiers' Obligation Article, Article 7, forbids North Korean soldiers to be captured as a prisoner of war in combat. So if you are captured alive as a prisoner of war, then yourself is regarded treason. And also, North Korea is a society based on guilt by association. So this kind of, punishment not only goes to those POWs themselves, but it would also go beyond to the members of families. And North Korea is a class system. All North Korean populations are divided into three classes. The first ruling class is called core class. And the second one, majority of North Korean citizens are belonging to wavering class. And the last one is hostile class. So if North Korean soldiers are captured alive in combat, their class would be degraded to wavering class. And if you are in wavering class, then you may lose a lot of, privileges which you enjoyed when you were in core class. So in North Korea, where you live, what kind of education you can get, what kind of jobs you can get, and how far you can be promoted, this all would be dependent on which class you are belonging to. So this POW's case is not just simply stays on them, but it influences the rest of the families, their status in the society.
So would it be that their lives would also be at risk, or would it be just that their status would be at risk?
If these two POWs just were captured alive in combat and they are not exposed to the media or whatever, then they would be just degraded to wavering class. But the point is that when they were first exposed by the media, they showed their willingness to go to South Korea. So these prisoners of war were not only captured in alive, but they also wanted to go to South Korea. To North Korea, it's the enemy line, right? So their punishment would not just stay as degrading their classes, but then you must be sent to political prison camps. Then the family members' status in North Korea would be even more further downgraded to hostile class. So that is something very serious, case on this current North Korean POW's case.
The South Korean government and the UN have condemned the exposure of their identities. What do you say to that?
I raised the same questions to Ukrainians, but when they were first, exposed by the media, by Ukraine government, that was in January of last year when they were firstly captured. At that time, North Korean regime did not accept that they sent North Korean troops to Ukraine war. Their, certificate was a Russian army certificate, right? So nobody was quite sure whether they are really North Koreans or Russians, So at that time, Ukraine government wanted to tell to the world that there was involvement of North Korean forces to Russia's side. So that's why Ukrainians maybe wanted to use these POWs to get more help, from world community. But in any case, UN always wanted to approach this issue according to Geneva Convention, which clearly states that prisoners of war must be prevented from public curiosity. That's why the UN is a little bit, worrying about the continuity of exposing their photos or interviews, by the media. But on the meanwhile, what I think is that if the medias are silent on it, then nobody is quite sure what would happen to the future of these two prisoners of war. If Ukraine accepts Russia's, proposal to send them back to North Korea, then it could be another, humanitarian disaster. So now in South Korea, media are saying that the media should not be silent so that the world should know this case. And even though there is international law of full-scale repatriation to homeland, but there is another international humanitarian law which forbids the forceful repatriation. That's why I think that we should respect the decisions of these two young North Korean soldiers.
But wouldn't it be unlikely that they would be sent back to North Korea because of South Korea's relationship with Ukraine, and also it wouldn't be very good for Ukraine's image?
Yes, but the point is that so far, Ukrainian government did not clearly say that they would not repatriate them back to Russia and North Korea. And I met not many Ukrainian politicians, and I asked, what if President Putin insists the repatriation of these POWs back to Russia? Their answer was that the priority of Ukrainian politicians is to bring all Ukrainian prisoners of wars and Ukrainian kidnapped children back. So they want to follow and serve this priority. That was their answer. And they did not clearly say that, these two soldiers, North Korean soldiers, do not want to go back to North Korea, so we would respect them and we would send them any country they want. But we haven't so far heard this kind of answer from Ukrainian government or Ukrainian parliament. That really worries me.
Going back to the POWs, in the early days, one of them told the media he thought he probably did want to go to South Korea, but the other one indicated that he still felt as though he might want to go to North Korea. The UN would say that these POWs weren't fully informed of who they were talking to and where that information would go to.
I think it is a little bit regrettable that Ukrainian government firstly exposed, this news. But Ukraine is the country which is, at war with Russians. So maybe they have their own strategy and tactics on these issues. But on the meanwhile, when they were first exposed by media, one of them wanted to go to South Korea. The second one was a little bit wavering. That was their status at that time. But now it is almost 1 year. And now they learned that it's too late for them to go back to North Korea. So that's why now they are in 20s. So they have to worry about their rest of life. They have already expressed their willingness to go to South Korea, which is really a kind of, act of treason according to North Korean law. So if they are repatriated against their will to North Korea, then they would be sent to political prison camps. That is definitely sure, and they do understand that. So what we want to do is that now it is our obligation to save them, to bring them not only in South Korea or wherever they want to go. We want to give them a freedom. We want to prevent them to go to political prison camps inside North Korea. Yes, that is, I think, most important point at this moment.
Why are these two men so important to the defector community?
First of all, now there are more than 10,000 North Korean soldiers are fighting in Ukraine war. And in the long term, Kim Jong Un wanted to send more soldiers to Russia and even to Russian-occupied territory. Putin asked more than 30,000 North Korean soldiers for the work of rehabilitation in Russian-occupied territory. So in the future, the rest of North Korean soldiers now are watching what would be the final destination of these POWs. If these POWs are released and go to free world, then it could give another hope to all North Korean soldiers in Ukraine. Now look back in South Korea. There are hundreds of former North Korean army officers and soldiers. They came across the military demarcation line to South Korea for freedom. How was it possible? Because while they were serving in North Korean armies in military demarcation line, every day they listened South Korea's loudspeakers. So they came to understand what South Korean society is. So they wanted to enjoy the freedom. That's why they risked their lives. So we want to happen the same things in Ukraine, in Russia. Ukraine and Russia is so big country. It is not different from South Korea's military demarcation line. If there are thousands of North Korean soldiers are spread in this vast territory, they have more choices to defect, right? According to their will. That's why we want to solve this case, so that we want to give a dream and hope of freedom to the rest of North Korean soldiers and army officers there.
Do you get any sense that the news that there's 2 POWs in Ukraine has reached the people of North Korea?
Majority of North Korean people are not aware of these POWs, but North Korean forces know, because they were in the combat, the battlefields, and now every day they are instructed to avoid any prisoner of the wars in the real battle. So that's why this issue of 2 prisoner of wars would influence the whole North Korean forces in the future, and also it would influence the relations between Russia and North Korea. Kim Jong Un now consistently asking Putin to negotiate with Ukraine to bring these 2 soldiers back. If Putin fails to bring these 2 soldiers back to North Korea, then the solidarity between Kim Jong Un and Putin, would be, shaken. So that's why I think we want to try everything, to put a kind of wedge, through these issues.
How important do you think these POWs are to Kim Jong Un?
Oh, it's very important, because in North Korean history, it was the first POW case after the Korean War. And Kim Jong Un wants to show to the world that North Korean army is a kind of, invincible army.
What sort of response do you think Kim Jong Un would have if these 2 POWs were brought to South Korea?
Then, first of all, he would punish the leaders of their specific unit for the reason of failing to control their soldiers, and then also their family members would be downgraded. That's why these 2 soldiers, even in the interview with South Korean media, expressed their concerns about their parents and family members. In North Korea, usually, if one people defect, then the rest of his family members would be punished by degrading from the original class. So my case, that when I defected to South Korea, I have a sister and brother. I was told that they were expelled from Pyongyang because I lived in Pyongyang as a core class. But once I'm here, my sister and brother were expelled, so their status in North Korea downgraded from core to wavering, or maybe to hostile, right?
But CNN interviewed them in North Korea and they said they were fine. How difficult was it to watch that?
Oh, I watched, but that kind of propaganda work was not new to me, because North Korea did the similar things to the other defectors as well. So it was not quite a shocking news to me. But on the meanwhile, I felt very sorry by looking at their faces, And I do understand, those misfortunes they have to undergo because of me.
Now, in December last year, you and a number of defectors set up what's called an emergency committee for the free repatriation of the POWs. Why did you feel the need to do that?
Oh, first of all, we thought that these two soldiers would be easily repatriated to South Korea. So we just waited, but nothing happened. Their interviews were consistently on the show by the media, but in reality, nothing happened. There was no any civil society which wanted to, push South Korean government, international organizations, and Ukrainian government to give them freedom. That's why we decided to organize this emergency committee with North Korean defectors community so that we should raise our voices, for their freedom.
But I understand it's more difficult than you thought to bring them to South Korea. Why is that the case?
When we first organized this committee, we thought that if we raise our voices and conduct active, demonstrations, whatever, we could easily solve these problems. But the answer which we heard from United Nations system was that they should stay in Ukraine until there is ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, according to Geneva Convention. That means we have to wait the final end of the war. Who knows when, the war would end. So that's why we're a little bit, desperate, what would happen. And another thing is that we approached the South Korean government, international organizations, and even to Ukraine politicians, whatever. But so far, we haven't heard any clear answer that their decision to go to free world would be respected and would be realized. No answer yet. So that's why we are very much worried.
Do you think, in a sense, because North Korea is such a closed country and there hasn't been a North Korean POW since the Korean War, that these two should be an exception to the rule?
Yes. First of all, these North Korean soldiers are not aware of what they must do at this stage. I think in order to reach their dream of freedom, I think they bravely, clearly state to the world that they wanted to go to freedom, to free world. If they consistently say this again and send this message again and again, then the world and international organizations would lend their ears to their appeal. And on the meanwhile, I think we should raise our concerns to international community that these two soldiers must be repatriated or must be sent to free world according to their will. They must not be repatriated against their will. I think this is against humanity.
Why do you think then that the South Korean government and the UN have both said that there should be no more exposure of these POWs and that it should be left to quiet diplomacy?
UN always want to approach these kind of cases according to international law, because if UN system does not respect international law, then there is no merit for existence of UN. According to Geneva Convention, these POWs must be protected and prevented from public curiosity. That's why UN wanted to follow this Geneva, the convention. During the Second World War, many prisoners of wars were exposed to the media or were forced to march in the streets, were forced to be humiliated. So in order to safeguard their human rights, UN, made this Geneva Convention, and UN wanted to respect to this Geneva Convention by all states, not only Ukraine, South Korea, even North Korea and Russia. That's why there was no choice but to follow according to UN Geneva Convention.
So you believe that when this law was made, it was very different circumstances to what the North Korean POWs are experiencing now?
Yes, I fully understand the UN always wants to answer according to their regulation and principle. But on the meanwhile, this is a very unique and peculiar case. North Korea is the only country in the world which forbids its soldiers to be captured alive in combat. So I think international law must not be technically applied to North Korean case, because North Korea it's a very special case, right?
The South Korean government says it's negotiating with Ukraine. What's your response to that claim?
I think it's a South Korea government is negotiating, but what I'm not quite clear is that whether they are negotiating enthusiastically or they are just negotiating just according to their own principles or regulations. That is quite two different things. According to South Korea's constitution, the Article 3, these North Korean soldiers are now South Korean citizens once they stated that they wanted to go to South Korea. So their legal status, according to South Korean constitution, is that they are South Korean citizens. So the government must do everything possible to save their lives. Yes, but at what level, what kind of enthusiasm are, for these issues, I'm not quite sure.
You were part of the previous government. What's your understanding of what it was doing to bring the POWs to South Korea?
The previous government wanted to bring them back very earnestly, but the current government is different. Current government wants to have a kind of, dialogue and cooperation with North Korean regime. They do not want to offend the Kim Jong Un regime, which could be harmful for the possibility of opening North and South summit. So the current government wants to approach this issue very silently. So that is two different points between previous and the current government.
What's your understanding of why the previous government didn't succeed in negotiations with Ukraine? What was the sticking point?
Mainly, I think Ukrainians worried a little bit that if they release unilaterally these two soldiers back to South Korea, then what would Russians do to Ukrainian prisoners of wars and kidnapped children? Because Ukrainians want to bring their prisoners of wars and kidnapped children according to international law, Geneva Convention. But if Ukrainians unilaterally release one of those POWs from Russian side to South Korea, that means Ukrainian government violates, firstly, this Geneva Convention. So at that time, they maybe arrived at the conclusion that unilateral release of these two soldiers to South Korea would not good for Ukrainians at that moment. So that's why Ukrainians are waiting, the final ceasefire with the Russians. They want to find a proper explanations or excuse to release them.
With the current government, I know that they want to engage with North Korea, but given the relationship with Kim Jong Un is at what seems to be an all-time low, why should they be worried about bringing the POWs to South Korea?
It's in the history, all the liberal democratic governments in South Korea succeeded in North-South Summit. Kim Dae-jung, Roh Moo-hyun, and Moon Jae-in as well. So the current president, Lee Jae-myung, wanted to make that kind of legacy again during his term. If he failed to make that kind of legacy in his term, he could be regarded a kind of failed president by their liberal forces, right? So that's why the Lee Jae-myung government wants to avoid anything which could offend the North Korean regime.